This single weapon was the worst nightmare for Japanese soldiers during World War II. They were told to dispose of American soldiers with the Browning automatic rifle because they knew how destructive it really was. Trench warfare. During World War I, the ground became a bloody stalemate in trenches. Infantry commanders faced a huge problem that almost seemed impossible to solve with their existing weapons. The standard infantry weapon at that point was still bolt-action rifles. A trained soldier could perhaps make 15 aimed shots per minute, which was very little at the time. Wars meant heavy firing, but after each shot, he had to manually cycle the bolt to chamber the next round. At first, it worked perfectly, especially at a distance, but when the troops needed to cross open ground during an assault, it was a huge vulnerability. Most of the soldiers would die even before getting a chance to kill their enemy. If the men stopped moving to shoot, they became stationary targets for enemy artillery and machine guns. But if they kept advancing without firing, enemy defenders would emerge from cover, set up their weapons, and destroy everyone who was caught in the exposed no-man's land. Artillery bombardments were brutal here and could destroy enemy positions for hours, forcing defenders deep into their bunkers. But that supportive fire had to stop before friendly troops went over the top. In those critical seconds, when the artillery barrage lifted, and when attackers actually reached the enemy trenches, defenders would crawl out of their holes, set up their machine guns, and slaughter everyone in the open. It was clear that the infantry desperately needed automatic firepower that could move with the assault, something that would keep soldiers shooting while they advanced, suppressing enemy positions during the fatal opening and exposure. They couldn't stop and establish a firing line, because if they had a bunch of men together, they would become even better targets. Heavier crew-served machine guns, like water-cooled Maxims, still existed, but dragging one of those out in the mud and in the open was not really realistic. It was really dumb. From there, the French attempted a solution with an automatic rifle. The concept here was that a single soldier could carry meaningful automatic firepower forward during an attack, but the weapon they said that they created was awkward, unreliable, and would jam in the most intense moments. American troops, however, received versions rechambered for 30-06 and had a constant malfunction, so while the French had proved that it was not possible, they still hadn't built the right tool for the job. Before we reveal what exactly the Americans created and how it became the slaughtering machine in the First World War, subscribe now. The weapon. They took the right man for the job, and his name was John Browning, the most accomplished firearms designer in American history. Through years of development and refinement, Browning made a weapon unlike anything that existed at that time. It was called the Browning Automatic Rifle, or simply BAR. It was chambered in the design for .30-06 caliber. It weighed approximately 16 pounds and fed from a 20-round, detachable box magazine. BAR was designed around a specific tactical attack called the walking fire. Here is the concept for everyone to understand. Soldiers equipped with these automatic rifles would advance towards the enemy position while firing, without the need for constant reloading or wasting their time. You weren't just trying to hit specific individual targets, but you wanted enough rounds going down range to force every defender to keep his head down while the assault line closed the distance, and you won. Unlike bolt-action rifles that have manual cycling after each shot, the BAR lets soldiers keep walking and shooting without breaking the momentum. Browning even designed the weapon's controls specifically around the concept. The fire selector was stiff, requiring genuine effort to move, sometimes even 2 fingers. It traveled from safe forward to semi-automatic, then forward again to full automatic. A spring-loaded detent made switching from semi to full easy under stress, but returning to safe required quite a lot of force. A soldier who would panically switch modes in combat couldn't accidentally flip to the safe, and his rifle would be dead at the worst possible moment. This was the built-in design that made the BAR so perfect. The BAR came with a purpose-built web gear too, and the gunner's belt featured a metal cup mounted on the right side, specifically designed to move the buttstock while firing from the hip on the move. This wasn't something soldiers improvised in the field, but they were trained in it. It was the official Army doctrine with a dedicated equipment engineer to make it work. End of the war. For the first time in history, the BAR saw combat in September 1980, just weeks before the armistice ended World War I, but the weapon never really got to prove itself in the role that it was specifically designed for. General Parrish was concerned that deploying the BAR in small numbers would allow Germans to capture examples and reverse engineer them. He wanted to feel the weapon was very difficult, and massive numbers all at once. equipping the entire division simultaneously while giving them complete control instead of letting it trickle into their combat in small pieces so their enemies would recreate it. The plan was to unleash it during the expected 1919 spring offensive, but World War I ended in November 1918 before that could happen, so the bar went into storage without ever being tested for what it was capable of. Then something completely unexpected happened. The roughly 50,000 bars that were sitting in national armories across America became targets for criminals during the Prohibition's most violent years. Guard facilities had part-time staff and relatively weak security compared to active military bases. Clyde Barrow made the bar his signature weapon, and the notorious outlaws took huge advantage of it. Thompson submachine guns were overshadowed by the BAR because the APT 30-06 rifle cartridge could punch clean through the body panels of 1930 automobiles, something that the older Thompson pistol rounds weren't able to do. In 1933, Clyde and his brothers broke into the National Guard Armory in Oklahoma and stole 5 bars along with thousands of rounds of ammunition. Clyde modified his stolen weapon by cutting down the barrels and stock. When Bonnie and Clyde were finally ambushed in 1934 and killed by law enforcement, their bullet-riddled car contained 3 fully automatic bars and approximately 100 loaded magazines. These shootouts were completely outgunned by the police with military weapons. Then the legislation imposed a $200 federal tax on automatic weapons, which in 1934 was a huge amount of money. And before we reveal why exactly the Japanese hated the BAR soldiers, subscribe to the channel now because you won't regret it. The modifications. It was the late 1930s, with another global war looking increasingly inevitable. The Army decided to update the bar's design for modern combat, making it even more lethal than it actually was. From there, they came with the M1918-A2, and the modifications were so huge that they terrified all the soldiers in the world. They eliminated the semi-automatic fire entirely, replacing it with 2 automatic settings, a slower rate of firing using the hydraulic buffer mechanism, and a faster rate without the buffer engaged. They added the bipod that mounted near the muzzle, with a fire suppressor to reduce the muzzle signature, and a hinged buttstock rest for better and more stable firing. The original 16-pound weight grew to nearly 20 pounds with a fully loaded barrel. The Army was attempting to transform the BAR into a light machine gun with a lot of promise, but they never addressed the fundamental limitation, which is the inability to quickly change the barrel during sustained automatic fire. Barrels overheat, and accuracy degrades dramatically. The light machine guns allowed crews to fire bursts in seconds, maintaining continuous fire. The BAR required armor, which was leveled, and disassembly was impractical in many combat situations. Then, the Belgian manufacturer FN offered the US Army a quick-change barrel, but the Army rejected it because it wouldn't fix the existing receivers without substantial modifications. That decision meant American soldiers arrived in the Pacific with a weapon that was designed for the French trenches, modified into something that wasn't a light machine gun but acted like one. A lot of soldiers then discarded the bipods and flash suppressors to reduce weight and used the gun the way John Browning had originally intended. Japanese gunners targeting bars. In World War II, everyone knew that the bar was the squad's primary automatic weapon, operated by a 3-man team. The gunner carried around 220 rounds in 11 different magazines, and the assistant gunner carried extra ammunition while trying to immediately grab the weapon and continue firing. The primary gunner went down. Everyone in the squad learned the basics of operating the bar because the Army fully expected bar gunners to dominate the battlefield and to cause casualties at significantly higher rates than regular riflemen. Post-war analysis estimated that the average combat lifespan of a bar gunner was roughly 30 minutes once the serious fight started. The tactical logic here was quite simple. If you eliminated the man with the automatic rifle, you had deferred an entire squad's ability to lay down suppressive fire. Every enemy combatant who spotted an American infantry unit knew exactly who to shoot first. Reports from the Pacific Theater commanders confirmed this and noted that in all engagements, the enemy constantly gave priority attention to the bar. To understand why Japanese soldiers feared this weapon so badly, we need to understand what they were carrying and how different their squads were compared to the American soldiers. The Type 96 and Type 99 light machine guns were quite equivalent to the BAR that the Japanese had, but they weren't even the same class of weapon at all. These were crew-served light machine guns based on the Czechoslovakian ZB-26 design that required a dedicated team to operate efficiently. The Type 96 held 30 rounds compared to the BAR's 20. and Japanese guns had something American gunners wanted desperately: a quick-change barrel that let the crew swap out overheated barrels in seconds. There is something genuinely interesting about the Japanese approach. They never developed anything like the bar. They never fielded a true squad automatic weapon that one soldier could carry and operate independently. They never even deployed submachine guns in any huge numbers either. The Type 100 was Japan's only submachine gun of the war, and the production was quite limited, with most Japanese soldiers never even seeing one. Their standard infantry weapon remained the bolt-action Arisaka rifle, and the entire tactical strategy was built around something different from the Americans. At the Battle of Tenaru River in August 1942, around 900 Japanese soldiers charged across a sandbar into Marine positions where defenders had established interlocking fields of automatic fire, complemented by heavy water-cooled machine guns filling gaps and even covering blind spots across the entire approach. By morning, 800 Japanese soldiers were left against only 44 Marines, who were killed. Then, on Saipan in July 1944, over 4,000 Japanese soldiers launched what would become the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War. They attacked before dawn, and the fighting continued for 12 hours. Weapons were there, and it was no longer about discipline, but the gunners just swinging their rifles across each other, even as bodies piled up in front of American positions. Japanese soldiers kept coming, literally climbing over their own dead to continue the assault. When it finally ended, over 4,000 Japanese individuals were killed. Even in Manila, two bar gunners named Cleto Rodriguez and John Reese found their platoon pinned down 100 yards from a heavily defended railroad station occupied by 300 Japanese infantry. They had every grenade and magazine and sprinted through the enemy fire to a building just 60 yards from the objective. For over an hour, they engaged targets of opportunity, killing more than 35 enemy soldiers. By the final campaign of the Pacific War, something changed in Japanese infantry tactics. They did not charge in like they used to. The bar remained in U.S. military service for a long time, even after the Pacific War. That is how dangerous it actually was. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe now to stay up to date with the biggest horrors of the past.